The film begins in the city of Valencia, where heavy rain flooded the streets, causing traffic to come to a standstill. Cars couldn't move, and both drivers and passengers were stranded. The news warned the city's residents about the intense rain and harsh weather, advising them to stay in place for their own safety. Among the halted cars was the vehicle of Sandra, the manager of Valencia Bank. She called a man named Antonio, asking if her name was on the list of people who would be leaving the bank. Antonio informed her that he hadn't received any information yet. Sandra asked him to keep it a secret if her name was indeed on the list. Sandra got out of her car in front of the bank and entered to ask about the staff who were supposed to activate the bank's alarms. The employee, Mejino, told her that no one had arrived yet due to the severe weather and dangerous road conditions, but assured her that things would settle later in the afternoon. One of the staff members noticed that Sandra seemed upset, and Mejino revealed that Sandra's name was indeed on the list of people who would be let go from the bank. When Sandra entered her office, she called Antonio again. This time, she confirmed that her name was on the list and that they had decided to let her go from the bank. This left her feeling deeply sad and anxious. At the same time, a masked, armed gang attacked the bank. Some of them were wearing explosive vests, and they quickly took control of all the employees. Sandra was in her office, talking to her relative Walken over the phone, asking for his help before she was fired. However, Walken told her that there was nothing he could do to help. Meanwhile, one of the gang members, Gallo, entered her office along with his colleague Jack. They restrained Sandra to prevent her from moving. Using their tools, they began breaking into the bank's vaults to steal from the safety deposit boxes. They had also started digging a tunnel underground to smuggle the stolen goods. The gang leader, Uruguayo, tried to keep the workers under control to ensure that no one outside the bank would notice the robbery. Suddenly, he discovered that one of the employees had pressed the alarm button in the office. Uruguayo became furious, assaulted the employee who triggered the alarm, and threatened to blow up the bank. One of the hostages tried to persuade the leader not to detonate the bomb, explaining that she had a son who needed her. He allowed her to make a call to him and gave all the employees a minute and a half to contact their loved ones. However, his real intent was just to scare them, with no actual plan to kill anyone. Meanwhile, the police received the alarm signal and realized that the bank was in danger. Detective Domingo called the bank's number, only to have one of the gang members answer and threaten to blow up the hostages if the police intervened before they could get what they wanted. The criminals demanded a car and a plane for their escape after the robbery. However, Detective Domingo told them that the decision wasn't entirely his and that he needed approval from higher authorities. Later, Gallo informed his boss that they had a serious problem with the tunnel they had dug for their escape, as the water level had risen due to the heavy rain. They decided to wait for half an hour for the water to recede. During that time, Sandra spoke with Gallo and told him that she was being fired from the bank. She convinced him to steal a specific vault, explaining that it contained a significant secret. However, she refused to reveal the details until he promised her a share of the money. Elsewhere, Jones, a politician, was in a coma in the hospital. His wife, Marina, was with him when she saw the news about the bank robbery on television. Feeling extremely anxious, she called her friend, Detective Julio, to ask about the truth of the reports. Julio replied that he hadn't heard the news, so Marina told him that her husband, Jones, had a safety deposit box in the bank. If someone opened the box and found out what was inside, Jones would be in great danger. Julio tried to calm her down, promising to intervene. He then called his colleague, Officer Fawn, and shared with him what Marina had told him, explaining that while he didn't know what was inside the box, it was something very important. At the same time, Sandra showed a video to Gallo on a screen in which Jones was seen entering the safety deposit vault, holding a hard disk to hide it in the box he had rented. Sandra explained that Jones had previously faced a major scandal when one of his employees at the detective agency revealed his secrets. At that time, all the media outlets were talking about him, and his reputation was severely damaged. Sandra recounted that Jones collected all the corruption activities he engaged in, along with information about the people inside the government who helped him, and stored it on a hard disk, which he kept in the bank's vault. Gallo went to get a collection of diamonds for Sandra in exchange for her revealing the number of the box where Jones hid the hard disk. Sandra took the diamonds and told him that the box number was 314. Meanwhile, Uruguayo contacted Detective Domingo and asked him to bring food to the bank, warning him against putting any sedatives in the food, as they would test it on hostages before eating it themselves. After some time, Gallo noticed that the water level in the tunnel was rising, and informed his colleagues that they needed to finish the mission as quickly as possible to escape before things got worse. Meanwhile, the police surrounded the bank from the outside. The criminals strapped explosive belts on some of the employees, warning them not to move or the bombs would explode. Gallo returned to the area where the safety deposit boxes were kept and informed one of his colleagues that Jones's box was numbered 314. At that moment, his colleague suspected that Gallo was a traitor and that he had come with him only to steal this specific box. He went to expose him to the rest of the gang. Gallo responded that it was Sandra who told him about the box, but the rest of the gang ordered him to descend into the tunnel quickly before it flooded. The gang members began descending into the tunnel with the bags containing the loot. The last person used a strong rope and pulled a desk behind him to block the opening they had dug. One of them went alone to the end of the tunnel to see if they could swim but struggled to breathe and returned, informing them that the water current was too strong and uncontrollable. At that moment, the gang decided to return to the bank. They gathered their strength, moved the desk away from the opening, and climbed out. Simultaneously, the police decided to storm the bank. Domingo contacted the criminals and told them that the food they requested had arrived, asking them to open the bank door to receive it. One of the gang members went to open the door while the police took positions beside the bank wall to ambush the criminal who stepped out to get the food. However, just before the door was opened, orders came for the police to abort the raid. The officers retreated, and the corrupt officials involved with Jones gathered to discuss how to resolve the issue. It was then revealed that one of the officers had made a deal with Uruguayo to steal the hard disk from Jones's vault in order to protect himself. At that moment, Fawn and his colleagues became extremely angry because the officer acted without consulting or informing them. They decided to appoint a new detective to the case named Paolo, who was one of their own and someone they trusted. Detective Paolo would be responsible for delivering the hard disk to them once it was found. Meanwhile, the gang members convened and agreed that as long as they had Jones's box, they were safe and would be able to escape by blackmailing the officials. When Uruguayo found out that Sandra was the one who told Gallo the box number, he became certain that she had been bribed in exchange. Furious, he went to angrily knock on the bathroom door where Sandra was hiding. Uruguayo lost his temper and attacked Sandra, demanding to know what she received in return, angry at the thought that she profited from their efforts. A fight broke out between Gallo and his colleague Uruguayo because of her. Uruguayo entered the bathroom and found the bag of diamonds, but he discovered that the bag was empty. He became enraged, realizing that Gallo had bribed Sandra with diamonds, not cash. He informed the rest of the gang that Sandra had swallowed the diamonds to prevent them from retrieving them. Meanwhile, one of the gang members, Loco, tried to access the contents of the hard disk. However, he encountered a chess game with a puzzle, and when he selected the wrong option, the hard disk began automatically erasing all the data. He attempted to recover the data, but failed. Later, Detective Paolo took charge of the case and called the bank, where Uruguayo answered. Uruguayo expressed his anger at the presence of the police around the bank, as he and his gang couldn't escape. Paolo told him that things would be handled differently from now on. Paolo requested a face-to-face meeting with Uruguayo, as he was the leader of the gang, but Uruguayo refused, fearing they would kill him. Paolo promised that no one would fire at them, and Uruguayo agreed to meet him at the bank's door in 5 minutes. When he stepped out to meet him, Paolo talked to him, telling him he would help him escape since his plan had failed and that Uruguayo must follow his orders. After returning to the bank, Uruguayo spoke with the gang members and informed them of Paolo's plan, which involved escaping through the building next to the bank. However, the gang members were skeptical, thinking the police might set a trap there. Uruguayo responded that they would go up to the 4th floor of the building and enter an apartment through a window that would be left open for them. Once inside, they would find police uniforms to change into. At that moment, Loco confessed to Uruguayo that he had accidentally lost all the data on the hard disk. Uruguayo became enraged and beat him. Then Gallo stepped in to try to calm Uruguayo, but when he learned what had happened, he too attacked Loco. Everyone realized that their only chance to escape peacefully had been lost. The gang fled to the building Paolo had pointed out, where one of Paolo's men was waiting to help them. They disguised themselves in police uniforms, but Gallo knocked the man out by hitting him on the head, deciding to escape without being monitored by the police so no one would find out that the hard disk they had was empty. The gang then headed down to the building's entrance with Sandra in tow, where they encountered police guards at the entrance. The guards asked them to show their IDs and exit permits. The guards inquired about Sandra, and Gallo told them they found her on the 5th floor, but the police didn't believe them and tried to prevent them from going out into the street. At that moment, the gang members aimed their weapons at the police, who responded in kind, leading to a shootout between the two sides. During the fight, Sandra was shot in the arm. Gallo supported her to help her exit the building. Both Gallo and Uruguayo felt a deep sense of sorrow for her. The gang decided to leave Sandra behind, not wanting to take her with them to avoid further harm. Uruguayo asked her to stall the police for as long as possible, and they said their goodbyes before leaving. Uruguayo contacted Paulo, who asked him to take responsibility for his actions and surrender. However, Uruguayo refused and threatened that if they didn't receive a car within half an hour to transport him and his colleagues, he would be forced to kill one hostage every 15 minutes. After ending the call, Paulo spoke with Julio and understood that they needed to act wisely to avoid escalating the situation, as the gang was dangerous and had a track record of knowing exactly what they were doing. They both agreed that the gang must leave the bank without the hostages. Uruguayo sat with Gallo in the safety deposit vault room, and they exchanged apologies for what had happened between them, reconciling. Each told the other about the events they'd gone through since the last time they met before the operation. They laughed together, trying to relieve the tension and pressure they were under. Meanwhile, Loco, another gang member, became infatuated with one of the female hostages and took her to a separate place, giving her a large sum of the stolen money. He asked her to hide the money so she could pay off her debts after they left the bank. He explained that the money he stole was from the vault of a corrupt politician who had been stealing from the people, which justified his decision to share some of the wealth. The woman, frightened, took the money and hid it in her clothes before returning to the rest of the hostages. When the gang realized their escape plan wasn't going as expected, they decided to resort to another solution. Uruguayo contacted Paulo again, this time requesting to speak with someone who worked in the government. When Paulo asked why, Uruguayo refused to provide details, explaining that if they didn't comply with his request, he wouldn't kill the hostages or escape with them. Instead, he would expose all the information that was on Jones's hard disk, including his illegal activities. Paulo became extremely worried because he was a corrupt cop who had been involved with Jones in everything. Realizing the potential fallout, Paulo called Julio, explaining the situation. Julio contacted Detective Fawn, urging him to meet with the gang and resolve the issue discreetly. Fawn, also involved in Jones's corrupt dealings, reluctantly agreed. He met with Gallo and Uruguayo, offering to help reduce their prison sentences in exchange for the hard disk. However, the gang lied to him, claiming they had already seen videos on the disk implicating Fawn and his superiors. Uruguayo ordered Fawn to bring a car to transport them from the bank. Meanwhile, Sandra was admitted to the hospital, where Fawn's secretary visited her. The secretary asked Sandra for information about the gang. Sandra cooperated partially, giving the names of some gang members but withholding any mention of the hard disk's contents. Fawn called Uruguayo again, demanding to see the alleged videos on the hard disk. When Uruguayo refused, Fawn became suspicious and confronted him, accusing him of bluffing. Realizing they were losing control, Fawn and his superiors decided to raid the bank and arrest the gang. The police sent a bus for the gang as they had requested. The hostages exited the bank first, boarding the bus. However, the gang had cleverly swapped clothes with the hostages, blending in to escape unnoticed. By the time the police realized the truth, the gang had already fled through the secret underground tunnel. The water level in the tunnel had receded just enough for them to escape with the stolen goods. The gang successfully left the country, disappearing into anonymity and continuing their lives as fugitives. Despite their internal conflicts and close calls, their plan ultimately succeeded, leaving the authorities scrambling to recover from their failure.